There is a way of telling a story that's given a Latin name. It's called in medias res, which is that you don't start from the beginning. You start from towards the end and then retrace your steps. Goes back to at least Homer, but you may well have seen the film Titanic, where it starts with divers exploring the wreck before it goes back in time to telling the story of the launch of the ship. So there's no secret here that I'm going to end up by saying, please take an envelope from the back of church. In it, there will be a letter about money, and I would like you to read as much of it as you can bear and reply with the reply slip in the envelope. So that's where we're going, but how will we get there? So let's have a think about this. There's a prayer that I quite often use that I wrote for St. James's that talks about our church having fruit. And you can talk about that in any number of ways, but perhaps the most obvious way, not perhaps the most profound way, is to think of what people see when they watch, look at, gaze upon, experience St. James's Church. And you can see there's a whole lot of things. There's not a particular order and merit about one colour rather than one size, but it goes from on one side servers to the other side to the spire and goes up to websites and connections and the ark. There's lots of things that happen through the year, through the month, and through the week at St. James's. And in a sense, those are what people see. But of course, that's only part of the story. What can be seen, because we know that for every tree that produces fruit, underneath there are roots that draw in the nutrition from the soil. So we need to remember that what can be seen is only part of what goes on under the banner St. James's Church. There are things that support the fruit, if you might say so. Things like, the worship we do together in some way fuels our keenness and our enthusiasm and our desire to serve. But on the other hand, there's safeguarding and administration. There's practical things like looking after the building, looking after the organ, and so on. So you have to remember that perhaps it's as much like the swan that famously is flapping under the water as much as just the roots apparently doing nothing. We have to remember that what can be seen is just part of the picture, and what we don't see might be hard and unglamorous work. If we're to ask the question, humanly speaking, what are the two most valuable resources that we have? Then I think there are two things that come to my mind, that are a bit like where the top of the barrel stops. You can't fill the barrel any more than the lowest slat that's letting the water through. And clearly one of the things that prevents us doing each and every wild idea any of one of us might have is simply the people who we are and how many we are. There's obviously things that we can't do because we are who we are, and that's okay. And the other thing, of course, is money, that we can't do something simply because we haven't got millions and millions of pounds to splurge around. I think the other great resource that we have is the building, but in a sense, the building needs money. So in a sense, it's subsumed with that. So I want to think about the fruit that we want to grow, the work that goes underground to grow that fruit, but to think in terms of people and money. Now, I have some bad news for you. You might be deluded enough to think that coming to church is a bit like going on a cruise. You've got great company, guaranteed weather, staff waiting for your every wish and request, and good food and drink. Well, that's the model of church we want to push out of our heads, I'm afraid to say, because that's not the reality. The reality is to use your imagination, is more like another sort of ship, a spaceship. And a spaceship, there are no passengers, there's only crew. Everyone's there for a reason. Everyone has a contribution to make. Everyone works with others. So in a sense, well, they probably have some downtime, but they work together, they have something to give, they support one another, and they go together. And I want to suggest that's a better model for church than a cruise liner. Now, we've had 2 readings that have spoken about generosity. And I'm going to talk about generosity in a broad scale in a moment. But the 2 readings that we had were Paul writing to his friends in Corinth, speaking about the poor people that he knew who had contributed beyond their means. But he starts and finishes that paragraph by reminding them that they're the second in the chain of giving, that God has given to them first. So that's why we've had 2 weeks thinking about God's generosity and being thankful for those things before we get to this week. God is generous to us, and so he encourages us to be generous people. And then that little vignette that we had from Luke's Gospel, we learn a generous person doesn't give out of their abundance, their spare change, we might say, but they gave what they could. So that's what a generous person is. Not somebody who simply has spare loose change at the end of the day and chucks it into a collecting bowl or wherever. It's someone who gives from their heart. I think 2 weeks ago I talked about, I think he's called the head of giving or something in the Church of England, and he breaks down being generous under these 7 headings. I'm not going to go through them all. We talked a little bit about them then. Some are clearer than others. But the point I want to make here is that wealth, money, is just one of 7 ways you can be generous. And then if we bunch up what I said about the limited resources of people with time and attention to a lesser extent, then that's one other way that we can be generous. And I think the challenge is to say, am I generous in all these ways? Am I comfortable being generous with these things? Am I thinking about these from my heart rather than from my bank balance? So a generous person might give in any of those ways. In our service, we often say it is our duty and our joy. Duty and joy. There are some tasks, some jobs that we find joy in. I know that some people enjoy cooking and then providing food. Other people enjoy gardening. But for other people, cooking is a chore, something that has to be done. Gardening is something we'd really rather only do when we ultimately have to do. Other people would see something like washing up as a chore, but find other people who enjoy it. And of course, the ideal thing is you're in a family household where someone enjoys the cooking and someone enjoys the washing up. But that may not be so, or you may live on your own and simply have to do everything whether you like it or not. And it's a bit like that with church. There are some things that we do, that we're called upon to do, that we quite enjoy, that we find fulfilling. People give us praise for. And that might be for anything from reading, as Josh did, or serving the coffee, or doing the cleaning. We might find that that's something that really fills my tank. But it could be, and it is the case, that there aren't simply enough people who find joy in every possible thing so that nobody has to do it out of duty. That's not the case. That many of us do things because they have to be done, not because we like them particularly. They're simply chores rather than a ministry. But here's the secret of the Christian life. Whatever task you must do, work as if your soul depends on it, as for the Lord and not for humans, since you know that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You serve the Lord Christ. I think that's about airy-fairy, a bit too airy-fairy for you. There's these famous lines from George Herbert about the philosopher's stone. And he says, a servant with this cause, serving the Lord, makes drudgery divine. Who sweeps as a room, as for thy laws, makes that and the action fine. This is the famous stone that turneth all to gold. For that which God doth touch and own cannot for less be told. He's saying even when we do chores, if we do them for God, then our hearts will begin to change because God is seeing what we do and approves. So that's the big picture about people. There's chores that have to be done, and we are coming to the time where more and more things are not quite our first choice. Over the last year, we've appealed for connections, for people to come forward and just open the doors and make sure it all happens. And we've just got about through that, but managing the rota is difficult. At the beginning of September, John did an appeal for the Ark, which was perilously short of people who would help run that playgroup. And we've just got by that. It's a bit scrimp and save, but we can do it. The next one on the horizon, I think, is going to be serving coffee after church. It's a chore, it's a joy, it's a duty. I don't know how you see it, but if it's going to be done, it has to be done by some of us. And this happens time and time again, doesn't it, in church's life? We're asked to do things. Sometimes we'll say, yes, I've been waiting to do this, waiting to be asked. And sometimes we simply do it because we're doing it for the Lord, and he changes everything from drudgery to divine. That's the people part. I'm going to talk about money, not quite as such length, but let's do the money bit. So, as I tried to explain previously, normally we've had this conversation early in the year, and that has meant that we've had clear numbers from the previous financial year. But the problem with that is that when we approach this part of the year and we're trying to set a budget, we're all at sixes and sevens. Also, when we appeal to you to give in the new year, then it all gets muddled up with the financial year and people don't give immediately and it gets surprised. So we're trying to line up all our ducks financially. But it does mean I can't tell you what we are going to spend and have spent entirely in 2025. So I'm just giving you the budget figures for last year. And so they're indicative, as people would say, rather than analyze them to the last penny. What I want to say from this chart is if you can see the large green chunk on this side, that's the amount we contribute to the Diocesan Common Fund. The large purple chunk on this side is the amount that we pay for administration in the office and the organist. So you can see two big chunks go on staff, we might say. And then the other chunks, the big blue chunk is church running costs. And then the one above it, the little green one, is hall running costs. So that's where our money goes, on things that you see and you can test and gauge what they're about. Let's just think about the common fund, which I've called what the diocese asked for us. That's the way the Church of England gathers the money in the London diocese and then distributes it across all the parishes. So that looks something like that. For one vicar in one church in one parish, it boils down to almost £100,000 per parish. Big chunk of that is my stipend, my salary, and a house. But there are other things in there too. So we tend to say, well, that's money gone off into the wild blue yonder. We don't know where it's gone and when it's coming back. But this is the figure you just need to hold in mind too. That pie there is 76%. That's what we contribute to the cost of this parish. We contribute approximately 3/4, which means someone else is contributing 1/4 to our parish. Perhaps a richer parish, perhaps some income from investments, but that 1/4 shouldn't really be there. We should be covering our costs. But in our budgeting, we've said to the diocese, this is where we are at the moment. This is what we contribute this year and next year. But really, we need to close that gap. But we also need to think about how we receive our money, obviously. So the big orange chunk here, the big red chunk, it is actually over here, is planned giving. That's the amount that people give week by week, month by month, envelope, direct debit, or standing order. That's the money that's given on a planned basis, that amount of money. And that's matched by the purple up there, which is the tax we get back on some of that money. Then the big green chunk is the hall rental income, which goes up and goes down. We don't have any control over that. So that's how that breaks down. But you might say, one chart was 100%, another chart was 100%. How do those two meet up? And it has to be said, for the past probably 10 years or so, our income has been less than our expenditure. And that has gone on and on and on. So if you know Dickens, you know Mr. Micawber, who said, annual income £20, expenditure £19, 19 shillings and sixpence, happiness. And if it's £20, 0 shillings and sixpence over, that's misery. Well, I'm not sure we're quite misery and despair, as the picture shows us, but it's not good. And so that's something we are, as a church, have to own up to getting right. My last slide. What am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to think, plan, and budget. We're talking about, as Christian people, God has given us the money that we have. It's come to us by a variety of means. And each of us in our own way has to have a feel of how much money we have in our bank, wherever, in our investments. And what are we going to do with that? Are we going to go on holiday? Are we going to buy an extension, buy a new car? We have to have some idea about these things before we start talking about church. But I'm asking you to think about church too. Think about being generous on a wider front and to St. James's. So our shortfall is difficult to pin down exactly, but if you want some kind of round figure, it's £600 more each month. Now, some of that will come from other sources, but if it was just down to us and the 60 people or so here, that's £10 a head a month, £2.50 a week. That's the order of magnitude. It's not a big jump we're asking for, but it is a step up. So, there's information in the pack about all this, but that's what we're asking you. So just stop and think and plan and budget and pray. Then, if you are giving to church, one way or another, can you regularize it? Can you tell us how much you expect to give to the church over the 2026? Set it up with a standing order or a direct debit so it's done easily for you and for us, and we know the money is coming in. Make it tax efficient. There's also information in the pack about legacies. There's a booklet at the back of church about legacies. If you're going to make a will, and I hope you've got a will, think about that. And then I say the last thing I want to say is that let us know what your plans are in regards to St. James's. So the finance team are meeting in a few weeks. Won't all be back by then, but when the PCC meets, we'll have some more information from you perhaps, and we'll know what we can expect as our income in the coming year. And then we need to look at our expenditure and bring those two closer together. So, as I say, there's an addressed envelope at the back of church for you. There's a letter from me, some more information about Martin, who can give you some practical answers if you're thinking about giving, and a reply slip. And we're asking, can we have the reply slip back by Remembrance Sunday? I want to finish, actually, where I started, which is saying all these things are good that we do. We are active. People contribute in all sorts of ways, big and small. All are valuable. So thank you to all that you do, whether you're talking about financially giving or giving of your time or energy. Thank you. Let's finish by praying. Heavenly Father, you give us all that we have, including one another and this church and all that it means. Give us generous hearts and help us then to know what you would do with the money you've entrusted with us. Guide and lead us, we pray. In the name of Christ. Amen.